Welcome to The Explainer. Look, there's a really common narrative going around right now that artificial intelligence is basically turning us into the stupidest generation in history. But when you actually look at the data, a completely different reality emerges. The real danger isn't that AI is making us dumb. Not at all. It's that we are facing a massive crisis of critical thinking. We're living in a landscape where literally anything can be faked, which means your ability to think independently is your absolute best defense. Okay, let's dive into this with a number. $25 million. That is exactly how much one single employee in the finance department of a Hong Kong company lost in January of 2024. And get this, he didn't lose it over years of bad, slow investments. He lost it in a matter of days. It was a completely devastating failure to spot the fake needle in a haystack of identical AI-generated needles. So here is exactly how this multi-million-dollar heist went down, and it perfectly illustrates the modern threat we're all dealing with. Step 1. The employee gets a message from his chief financial officer requesting a massive fund transfer. Now, the employee thought he was being incredibly smart. He thought it smelled kind of fishy, so he demanded, Step 2, a live video conference to confirm the request. Makes sense, right? Well, the CFO happily jumps on the video call, along with several other familiar team members, and they walk this employee through the transfer step by step. Feeling totally secure because he was looking his boss right in the eye, he moved to Step 3 and transferred the funds. A few days later, reality hit. Every single person on that video call was a deepfake. AI had scraped video clips and voice samples of his CFO and his team from the internet to create this perfectly synchronized real-time illusion. And just like that, the money was gone forever. That terrifying story brings us straight to Distortion 1, the illusion of authority. Authority is a force that can blind even the absolute sharpest minds in the room. To see just how blinding it can be, take a look at Theranos. This was a company claiming it could run hundreds of complex medical tests on a single, tiny drop of blood. It was a brilliant, world-changing idea. So brilliant, in fact, that marquee investors threw $700 million at it, propelling the company to a staggering $9 billion valuation at its peak. The CEO, Elizabeth Holmes, was wildly charismatic. She wore a black turtleneck like Steve Jobs, spoke in the steep baritone voice, and had this intense, unblinking stare. She convinced everyone she was a genius on a noble mission. Except, the miracle blood testing machine was just an empty box. It literally didn't work. The entire $9 billion empire was built on a complete lie, and Holmes was eventually sentenced to 11 years in prison. So the crucial point is, how did the sharpest minds in finance skip basic critical thinking and due diligence? Well, they fell for 3 glaring signs because they let authority completely distort their reality. First, the halo effect. Theranos had an incredibly impressive board. We're talking former secretaries of state, a 4-star general, but absolutely zero medical experts. Second, FOMO, the fear of missing out. Holmes made investors feel like if they didn't act right that second, they'd miss out on the next Apple or Google. And third, the veil of secrecy. A real medical device company cannot evade scrutiny, yet Theranos somehow kept its technology completely hidden for 12 years. People just replaced their own critical judgment with Holmes' confidence. If you want to know just how deeply people suspended their critical thinking, look at how Elizabeth Holmes actually answered when a reporter asked how the tech worked. She gave this response 6 different times. A chemistry is performed so that a chemical reaction occurs and generates a signal which is translated into a result. I mean, it's a completely circular sentence. It means absolutely nothing. Yet, surrounded by the aura of a $9 billion valuation, almost everyone just smiled and nodded. So how do you protect yourself from this illusion of authority? You use this actionable move. Whenever you're faced with a massive claim, whether it's from a charismatic CEO, a powerful politician, or an influential expert, ask this one disarming question. What needs to be true for this to be real? And in the AI era, you can actually use AI to help you answer it. Take that impressive claim, plug it into an AI tool, and tell it, show me the evidence that supports this, and show me all the evidence that challenges it. Force the authority to prove itself against actual reality. And that moves us right along to our second external distortion. Distortion 2, unmasking true lies. Because let's be honest, massive companies don't usually tell you outright fraudulent lies anymore. They've mastered the dark art of manicured, legally sanitized marketing. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly what I mean. You might see a shiny marketing promise that a Tesla Model 3 is starting at $37,000. That is the hook. But the reality, if you want all-wheel drive, it's $47K. If you want faster acceleration, you're looking at $55K. You want the self-driving feature? That is an extra $1,200 every single year. You see this everywhere, right? a battery that lasts up to 36 hours, a credit card with interest as low as 0% until you miss one payment and it immediately spikes to 24%. These are brilliantly engineered word noodles. They are perfectly edible, totally legal phrases, but entirely devoid of real nutritional value. To cut through these true lies, you need to use what we call the question mark move. First, train your ear to catch those empty calorie words, things like up to, starting at, or clinically proven. Second, whenever you hear one of those phrases, repeat the claim in your head with a massive question mark at the end. When a commercial says a product works up to 8 times faster, you say to yourself, up to 8 times faster than what exactly? The moment you apply the question mark, you expose the gap between the shiny promise and the actual product. Now we shift to the third distortion, breaking the groupthink trap. We're talking about how the consensus of a crowd can easily overpower your independent judgment, leading to mass hysteria. Think the Salem witch trials or tulip mania. It is incredibly difficult to trust your own eyes when a whole crowd is telling you that you're wrong. A famous psychological study called the Asch conformity experiment proves just how vulnerable we really are to this. Researchers brought a real participant into a room with 7 other people. They showed the room a target line and asked everyone to pick which of 3 other lines matched its length. The answer was completely obvious. There was no optical illusion going on. But the 7 other people in the room were actually paid actors, and one by one, they confidently chose the wrong line. By the time it got to the real participant, the social pressure was immense. 3 out of every 4 real participants ended up caving and giving the obviously wrong answer, simply because they couldn't stand being the only one in the room with a different viewpoint. Now, what's really interesting about this is the final stage of the experiment. The researchers found that if just one of those actors disagreed with the crowd and gave the right answer, the spell was broken. The real participant would suddenly feel empowered to tell the truth. It only takes one person to disagree to shatter groupthink. Today, your absolute best tool for finding that dissenting voice is the devil's advocate prompt. Use AI. Tell ChatGPT or Claude, make the strongest possible case that this popular consensus is completely wrong. Force the AI to be your dissenting voice so you can evaluate the actual logic, not just the crowd's confidence. All right, let's shift the narrative from external distortions to technological ones. Distortion 4, AI and the brain drain. Because right now, AI is simultaneously our biggest generator of ideas and our biggest generator of deceptions. While AI is this incredible tool, it's also a massive generator of mental laziness. A recent MIT study asked 2 groups of people to write essays, one group using their own brains, the other using ChatGPT. The brains of the ChatGPT users showed the least amount of activity during the task. Even worse, just minutes after finishing, the ChatGPT group couldn't quote a single line of what they had supposedly just written. AI gives us the power to create infinite content, but if we aren't careful, we end up outsourcing our critical thinking entirely. We stop thinking creatively and let the machine do the heavy lifting, leaving our own mental muscles to completely atrophy. The way to prevent this AI brain drain is to shift your role. You are no longer just a creator. You're an editor and a verifier. Whenever you use AI, constantly append these 2 phrases to your prompts. Be precise and please verify. Treat the AI like a mathematical being that can and will make mistakes. In fact, a great trick is to take the output from one AI engine, like ChatGPT, feed it into another, like Claude or Gemini, and ask it to review and cross-verify the first one's work. Do not let the ease of the technology replace your own rigorous judgment. Let's move to and see how this builds into our 5th, and honestly, our most difficult challenge. Distortion 5, the internal distortion. This is about the lies we tell ourselves because we desperately want something to be true. You see, we rarely fact-check our own desires. A story from the source material captures this perfectly. The speaker had a male friend who was hopelessly in love with a mutual female friend. When the speaker told the woman how devoted this guy was, she smiled and simply said, "His love for me is not enough of a reason for me to fall in love with him." Wow, right? Just because we want a story to be true doesn't make it reality. But we do this all the time with investments, relationships, and career choices. We believe what we most desire to believe. And that brings us to the ultimate question for any critical thinker trying to navigate this foggy, AI-driven era. What am I refusing to see because I need this story to be true? Truth and lies are currently stirred together so completely that you can barely tell them apart. You have to actively check for authority, push back against the crowd, and be brutally honest with your own desires. In a world where machines can generate infinite answers, your willingness to ask the hard questions is literally the only thing that keeps you human.